Imagine being trapped in a never-ending cycle of fear, anxiety, and self-doubt, with no escape in sight. This might sound like the plot of a horror movie, but for many of us, it's a harsh reality. In fact, research suggests that our brains are wired to focus on the negative, to prioritize threats over rewards, and to dwell on past traumas rather than present joys. But why is this the case? Why are we so prone to suffering? And is it possible to break free from this cycle of negativity? A study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that people tend to have a greater emotional response to negative events than positive ones, a phenomenon known as the negativity bias. This means that even when good things happen, our brains are more likely to focus on the potential downsides rather than the benefits. This negativity bias is so ingrained in our psyche that it can be incredibly difficult to shake off, even when we're consciously trying to focus on the positive. For example, a study conducted by psychologist Roy Baumeister at Florida State University found that people are more likely to remember and dwell on negative experiences than positive ones. This is because our brains have evolved to prioritize threats over rewards, as it was more important for our ancestors to remember potential dangers than to dwell on pleasant experiences. In fact, research by psychologist Timothy Wilson at the University of Virginia has shown that people are more motivated by the desire to avoid pain than to seek pleasure. This means that even when we're trying to make positive changes in our lives, our brains are often more focused on avoiding the negative consequences of failure than on achieving success. But what if we could overcome this negativity bias and train our brains to focus on the positive instead? What if we could learn to rewire our minds to prioritize joy, gratitude, and compassion rather than fear, anxiety, and self-doubt? One of the key reasons we're wired for negativity is due to the way our brains process information. You see, our brains are constantly scanning our environment for potential threats, and this can lead to a state of hypervigilance, where we're always on the lookout for danger. This can be useful in certain situations, such as when we're walking alone at night, but it can also lead to a state of chronic stress and anxiety. Research by psychologist Daniel Kahneman at Princeton University has shown that this hypervigilance can lead to a phenomenon known as loss aversion, where we tend to fear losses more than we value gains. For example, the pain of losing $100 is greater than the pleasure of gaining $100. This loss aversion can lead to a mindset of scarcity, where we're always focused on what we might lose rather than what we might gain. But what if we could learn to overcome this loss aversion and focus on the positive instead? What if we could learn to reframe our negative thoughts and focus on the opportunities rather than the obstacles? Research has shown that this is possible, and that by practicing mindfulness, gratitude, and self-compassion, we can actually rewire our brains to prioritize the positive. A study published in the Journal of Positive Psychology found that people who practice gratitude on a daily basis experienced greater well-being and life satisfaction than those who did not. Another study published in the Journal of Clinical Psychology found that mindfulness meditation can actually reduce symptoms of anxiety and depression by teaching us to focus on the present moment rather than dwelling on the past or worrying about the future. The concept of neuroplasticity, which was first introduced by psychologist Donald Hebb, suggests that our brains are highly adaptable and that we can actually rewire our minds through practice and repetition. This means that even if we're wired for negativity, we can still learn to overcome it and develop a more positive mindset. Research by psychologist Richard Davidson at the University of Wisconsin has shown that meditation and mindfulness can actually change the structure and function of our brains, leading to increased activity in areas associated with positive emotions, such as the left prefrontal cortex. But how do we actually go about rewiring our brains and developing a more positive mindset? Is it simply a matter of practicing mindfulness and gratitude, or is there more to it than that? And what role do our thoughts and emotions play in shaping our experiences? And can we actually learn to control them, or are they beyond our conscious control? As we navigate the complexities of our own minds, it's clear that the relationship between our thoughts, emotions, and experiences is far more complex than we often give it credit for. Our brains are constantly processing information and making decisions based on that information, often without our conscious awareness. But what if we could learn to tap into that unconscious mind and access the hidden patterns and motivations that drive our behavior? What if we could learn to listen to our intuition and trust our instincts rather than relying solely on rational thinking? Research by psychologist A.P. Ruiz at Radboud University has shown that our unconscious mind is capable of processing vast amounts of information and making complex decisions, often more effectively than our conscious mind. This raises some fascinating questions about the nature of consciousness and the role of the unconscious mind in shaping our experiences. And it's here, at the intersection of psychology, neuroscience, and philosophy, that we find ourselves at the cutting edge of human knowledge, with the potential to unlock the secrets of the human mind and discover new ways of thinking, being, and experiencing the world around us. And it's here that we'll pick up in the second half, as we delve deeper into the mysteries of the human mind and explore the ways in which we can overcome our negativity bias and develop a more positive, compassionate, and fulfilling way of living. So, we've established that our brains are wired to focus on the negative, and this is due to an evolutionary mechanism that helped our ancestors stay safe. But what about in modern times, where physical threats are relatively rare? Why do we still find ourselves dwelling on the bad stuff? Well, it's because our brains are still using that same old programming, and it's being reinforced by our environment and social interactions. For example, have you ever noticed how the news is always filled with stories about disasters, crimes, and conflicts? This is because negative events are more attention-grabbing and memorable than positive ones. And as a result, we're constantly being bombarded with negative information, which our brains then use to reinforce our existing biases and fears. According to a study by psychologist Roy Baumeister, people tend to give more weight to negative experiences than positive ones, which is known as the negativity bias. This means that even if we have a great day with lots of good things happening, one small bad thing can still ruin our mood and overshadow all the positive experiences. But here's the thing, we're not helpless against this negativity bias. We can actually rewire our brains to focus more on the positive, and it starts with becoming more aware of our thoughts and emotions. A study by psychologist Barbara Fredrickson found that people who practice gratitude and positive thinking tend to have a more balanced and optimistic outlook on life. So, how can you apply this to your own life? One simple step is to start a gratitude journal, where you write down 3 things you're thankful for each day. This can be as simple as a good cup of coffee, a beautiful sunset, or a supportive friend. By focusing on the good things in your life, you can start to shift your attention away from negative thoughts and cultivate a more positive mindset. Another strategy is to practice mindfulness meditation, which can help you become more aware of your thoughts and emotions in the present moment. This can help you catch yourself when you're dwelling on negative thoughts and intentionally shift your focus to something more positive. For example, let's say you're stuck in traffic and you start to feel frustrated and annoyed. Instead of getting caught up in those emotions, you could take a few deep breaths and focus on the sensation of your feet on the ground or the sound of the music playing in your car. By doing this, you can calm your nervous system and reduce your stress levels, even in the midst of a challenging situation. And finally, it's also important to surround yourself with positive influences and people who support and encourage you. When we're around people who are optimistic and enthusiastic, it can be contagious and help us feel more positive ourselves. So, take a look at your social circle and see if there are any people who are bringing you down or making you feel bad about yourself. It may be time to set some boundaries or distance yourself from those relationships, and instead seek out people who uplift and inspire you. For instance, you could join a club or group that aligns with your interests, or volunteer for a cause that you're passionate about. By doing this, you can surround yourself with like-minded people who share your values and passions. It's also worth noting that our brains are highly adaptable, and we can actually change the way we think and feel by practicing new habits and behaviors. This concept is known as neuroplasticity, and it's a powerful tool for overcoming negativity and developing a more positive mindset. For example, let's say you're someone who tends to be very self-critical and perfectionistic. You could start to practice self-compassion by writing yourself kind and supportive letters, or by speaking to yourself in a gentle and encouraging way. By doing this, you can start to rewire your brain to be more supportive and nurturing, rather than critical and judgmental. In addition to these strategies, it's also important to practice self-care and take care of your physical and emotional needs. This can include things like getting enough sleep, exercising regularly, and eating a healthy diet. When we take care of our bodies, we're better able to manage stress and negative emotions, and we're more resilient in the face of challenges. For example, let's say you're going through a tough time at work and you're feeling overwhelmed and stressed. Instead of turning to unhealthy coping mechanisms like junk food or social media, you could try going for a walk, practicing yoga, or reading a book. By doing this, you can calm your nervous system and reduce your stress levels, and you'll be better able to handle the challenges that come your way. Furthermore, it's also important to recognize that overcoming negativity is a process that takes time and effort. It's not something that you can just snap your fingers and change overnight. But with consistent practice and patience, you can start to develop a more positive and resilient mindset. For instance, you could start by committing to one small positive habit each day, such as writing in a gratitude journal or practicing a few minutes of meditation. As you get into the habit of practicing positivity, you can start to build on that and develop more complex and challenging habits. In conclusion, our brains are wired to focus on the negative, but that doesn't mean we're doomed to suffer. By becoming more aware of our thoughts and emotions, and by practicing simple strategies like gratitude, mindfulness, and self-compassion, we can start to shift our focus towards the positive and cultivate a more optimistic outlook on life. And by surrounding ourselves with positive influences, practicing self-care, and recognizing that overcoming negativity is a process, we can develop the resilience and confidence we need to thrive in a challenging world. If this helped you see yourself differently, subscribe. I post new psychology insights every single day. And if you want to go even deeper, check the link in the description for Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. It changed how millions of people think and act.